Hello and welcome to People and Profit, where we look at how business shapes our world. I'm Marcus Carlson. Coming up, Cubanomics. Barack Obama says he wants a revolution for the Cuban economy. We look at its strengths and weaknesses. Qatar calling. The Emirate invites fellow oil producers to talk about an oil production freeze. Would a deal boost crude prices? Plus, not for the faint of heart, we look at the little-known Chinese stock market that's catering to small companies. First up, though, Barack Obama has become the first US president to visit Cuba in 88 years. It's a political breakthrough, but it can also usher in a new era for the Cuban economy. This as the Obama administration is loosening sanctions that have been in place for decades. It opens the door for American businesses to enter the island. Rochelle Harrison-Pless takes a closer look at one such example.
A Cuban national monument. The Hotel Inglaterra is Havana's oldest hotel, but it's set to get an all-American corporate makeover, along with two other classic Cuban bolt holes, the historic Santa Isabel and the Quinta Avenida. All three will be renovated and run by American hotel giant Starwood, an historic agreement that will see them get the luxury collection and 4 points by Sheraton treatment.
We are going to elevate the quality of the properties to achieve the standards that we have established for those brands.
Starwood is the first US hotel company to sign a deal with Cuba in nearly 60 years. The timing couldn't be more ideal, with tourism on the communist island at an all-time high. Since the US relaxed travel restrictions in the wake of the two countries re-establishing diplomatic ties, the number of American visitors has soared by a whopping 77%, and that figure is set to rise.
With the application of probably more than 100 daily flights from the US, if that happens, clearly the amount of travelers to Havana and Cuba will skyrocket. And we want to make sure that we are ready to welcome them.
Starwood is not alone. Other big US-Cuba deals could be on the cards. AT&T, Marriott, and several cruise lines are negotiating with Cuban authorities. Meanwhile, home-sharing website Airbnb has the Americans' green light to take bookings in Cuba from non-US customers. It's all part of a dramatic U-turn by Washington, a move that looks to chip away at a decades-old economic embargo.
We're going to get more now on the Cuban economy and its future prospects. Delano D'Souza is here with more details. Delano.
Thanks, Marcus. Well, let's start by taking a look at where the Cuban economy is now. And the figures paint a bleak picture. GDP hasn't really picked up since 2009. In 2014, growth came in at a fairly lackluster rate of 1.3%. But Cuban statistics are seen as unreliable, and there are warnings the rate could actually be closer to zero. Despite that, the country does have a lot to offer. The tourism and mining sectors, for instance, are seen as strong. Agriculture, too, has a lot of potential. While nearly a fifth of the labor force works in the sector, it accounts for just 4% of the country's GDP. The labor force is skilled and, from an international perspective, cheap, with an average take-home salary of around $20 a month. Cubans also enjoy a high-quality healthcare system, and as a result, life expectancy is similar to what we can see here in France. At the same time, Cuba's population is shrinking and aging rapidly. That could cause a problem for productivity and growth further down the line. The tax system is in need of an update, as it discourages private companies from hiring. Infrastructure is also in need of improvement, particularly when it comes to the internet. Just 30% of Cubans are online, and even then, it's tightly controlled. As American companies eye Cuba, here's a look at the countries it currently trades with. Venezuela tops the list in terms of both imports and exports. Cuba is dependent on oil from the country, but lower oil prices are putting pressure on Venezuela's ability to buy Cuban goods, and Havana may have to look out for other alternatives. That's where the United States could step in. But while diplomatic relations are now resuming, the embargo still remains in place. That means business ties still rest with the U.S. Treasury Department, and they must authorize each American investment in the country. And while Barack Obama says the Cuban embargo should be lifted, the power to do that rests in the hands of the U.S. Congress. Marcus.
All right, thank you very much indeed, Delano. Next, we're going to ask whether major oil producers are about to turn down the taps, or at least keep them where they currently are. Qatar has invited fellow crude producers to talk about freezing production levels. The get-together is set to take place in Doha mid-April. The talk of a potential freeze has already helped to stabilize oil markets. Crude prices have come back from 12-year lows back in January. The oil cartel OPEC says 15 or 16 countries will attend the Doha talks. But will that be enough to reach an effective agreement? And will that be enough to put a floor under prices? To talk more about that, we can turn now to Richard Mallison. He's a geopolitical analyst at Energy Aspects, and he's joining us from London. Thank you very much indeed, Richard, first of all, for being with us. Do you think that there is enough momentum for a production freeze at this stage?
Well, we're certainly seeing quite a large group of both OPEC and non-OPEC countries indicating they're willing to take part in an action like this. But the critical issue is still that Saudi Arabia and other members of this group want to see some kind of commitment from Iran before they really firmly sign up to a production freeze. And Iran has been very dismissive of this process. It is, of course, bringing its own production levels back up after sanctions were eased in January, and it's simply not interested in capping its production. If you don't include the one member of OPEC that's likely to increase output this year, what difference does a production freeze really make to actual material fundamentals?
As you say, the Saudis and the Russians as well, to an extent, have said that we won't play unless everybody plays, essentially. They want the Iranians to also sign up to this agreement. What happens if the Iranians don't? Do you think that there is a chance that the Saudis, the Russians, the Qataris, etc., will still go for a production freeze?
Well, I think it doesn't cost most of these countries that much to keep production around the levels they started the year at. Countries like Qatar are already producing as much as they can. Saudi Arabia, yes, it does have spare capacity, but it was already producing above 10 million barrels a day, which is a historically high level for it. So I think they can adopt a wait-and-see approach over the next few months while they try and bring more countries, and in particular Iran, on board. And of course, by showing that they're willing to participate in a deal, they push the burden onto Iran, onto the other countries, to either step up and participate or to be the ones responsible for making OPEC ineffective.
Even if there is a production freeze, will it actually matter? Will it work to raise prices further at this stage, Richard? Because the problem essentially is that there is too much oil, and if you freeze production at current levels, won't that supply glut still remain, essentially?
That's exactly right. A freeze isn't the same thing as a cut. If everything else remains equal, then a freeze isn't going to do that much. It isn't really going to provide much in the way of rebalancing. But as I mentioned, what we're seeing is a slowdown or a loss of supplies, non-OPEC because of lower investment, and OPEC because of political disruptions. So those are the factors that are actually helping accelerate the rebalancing in the market. We're still oversupplied. We are going to be oversupplied through the next few months. But as we get into the second half of this year, if the level of disruptions remains high, if global demand continues to grow, then I think we will reach a more balanced market. And at that point, we could see oil prices rising further.
Do you think that a freeze could be a first step towards an actual production cut?
I think that's definitely a possibility. Again, Saudi Arabia has thrown down the gauntlet to Iran and other members to see if they're genuinely willing to take part in collective action. If we see a positive response, if Iran does come on board, which is by no means certain or even likely at this stage, but I think that could set the scene for more action towards the end of the year. It might not really be needed to rebalance the market by that stage, but certainly Saudi Arabia and others might want to prove that OPEC can act collectively once again, and that, if they actually agreed on a cut, that could push prices up.
Richard Mallison at Energy Aspects, thank you very much indeed. Now, many small and medium-sized companies in China say they're struggling to secure bank loans. They say state-owned lenders aren't providing them with the cash they need to expand. It's helped the emergence of a little-known stock market, the National Equities Exchange and Quotations, or for short, the NEQ. Small companies sell shares to raise cash, but from an investor's perspective, experts say it's not for the faint of heart.
They might be able to print their own money, but this fake currency is only used for offerings in traditional Chinese rituals. When it comes to real-world investment, this company has a hard time, just like thousands of other small private businesses. So, in a bid to secure funding, they're turning to China's fastest growing stock market, the National Equities Exchange and Quotations.
Why do we want to join the NEC? Because we think the NEC will become the Chinese NASDAQ in the future.
Susie Wu's firm invests in over 300 companies listed on the new bourse. She says the lack of financing forces many Chinese companies to turn to a loosely regulated, parallel money lending industry.
The small companies have risk, and so who wants to put the money into risky companies? And that really creates opportunity for the so-called shadow bank.
The NEC offers companies that can't meet the requirements for listing on the Shanghai and Shenzhen markets a chance to go public. And it says those listed raised more than $18 billion last year and more than $4 billion just in the first 2 months of 2016. But some analysts say potential investors should remain cautious.
The concern with the NEC is that they're lowering the requirements of these firms for these firms to list, but that they also aren't requiring full and accurate disclosure of the information, the products, the financial risks that investors might be facing.
Access to capital is a key question for Communist China's economic future, and Beijing is betting on smaller companies to become the new engine of growth, to move away from state-owned heavy industry, which is blamed for pulling down the world's second largest economy.
It's time to ring the closing bell when it comes to This People and Profit. If you want to get in touch about the show, connect with us on Facebook or tweet me at MarcusF24. Until next time, thank you for watching and stay with us here at France 24.